At the Constitutional Convention, the framers opted for a bicameral legislature, meaning a legislature made up of two chambers. This decision was partly practical and partly philosophical. The practical part was that having two chambers allowed for the Great Compromise, where both the small states and the large states could get their preferred representational schemes embodied in Congress, with the small states protected in the Senate and the large states predominating in the House. The philosophical part was that having a two-chamber legislature allowed for even greater separation of powers. By requiring any legislation to pass through two chambers, each with very different representational schemes, the framers provided another safeguard to make it difficult for slim, short-term majorities to enact major changes in law. Instead, they created a system that required broad-scale buy-in in order for Congress to get anything done. So let's examine how the House and Senate are set up differently. The first difference between the two chambers of Congress is size. The House of Representatives is much larger than the Senate, with 435 representatives compared to 100 senators. Now this has an impact on how each chamber is structured. Because of its larger size, leadership and organization is much more important in the House. If all 435 members of the House had an equal say on every matter that came before the chamber, nothing would ever get done. It'd be too much time spent on debate. So the House invests a lot of power in its leaders to structure the operations of that chamber. There's a clear power hierarchy between the ordinary or sort of rank and file member of the House and the House leadership. In the Senate, on the other hand, it's considered much more of a body of members with nearly equal powers. Leadership is still important in the Senate, but the individual senators still retain substantial authority in terms of how that chamber operates on a day-to-day basis. Another distinction between the two chambers is the length of terms that members serve. In the House, members are up for election every 2 years, whereas over on the Senate side, individual senators serve 6-year terms. And these terms are staggered so that 1/3 of the Senate is up for election every 2 years. So rather than electing all 100 senators in a single election on a 6-year basis, instead every 2 years, basically 33 or 34 senators are up for election. This is another way in which the framers tried to insulate American government from dramatic and rapid change. So regardless of what passions or issues might animate voters in a particular election, 2/3 of the Senate is safely insulated from any sort of temporary tide sweeping over the country. Another difference between the chambers has to do with constituents. On the House side, members of the House of Representatives represent districts within states, with each district containing about 720,000 people. Over on the Senate side, senators represent entire states, with 2 senators from each state. Another difference between the chambers is the constitutional minimum age. In the House of Representatives, you must be 25 years old in order to serve, 25 years or older, whereas in the Senate, the minimum age is 30 years. You can actually be younger than those ages when elected, as long as you meet the threshold by the time you're sworn in. So for instance, Joe Biden, who's now considered, one of the elder statesmen of U.S. politics, was first elected to the Senate as a 29-year-old. And he actually turned 30 between the election in November and his swearing in the following January. Another difference is in terms of leadership, who leads each chamber. In the House of Representatives, the top post is the Speaker of the House. This is a really important leadership position in Congress. Behind the President of the United States, the Speaker of the House is actually the second most powerful official in American government. Over on the Senate side, the top job goes to the Majority Leader. Now this position is certainly powerful, but it requires a much gentler touch than the Speaker of the House. because on the Senate side, individual senators feel much less obligated to go along with or abide by leadership demands than is the case in the House of Representatives. In terms of special powers, the House has the power to originate all tax bills. The House also has the power to impeach presidents, federal judges, and executive branch officials. Impeachment is commonly thought of as the removal of someone from office, but it's actually a two-step process where the House formally impeaches with a simple majority vote, and then the Senate holds an impeachment trial in which 2/3 of senators must vote affirmatively in order to convict or remove that official from office. So in U.S. history now, there have been 3 presidents, Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, and Donald Trump, who have been impeached by the House. But in each one of those cases, the Senate failed to remove those presidents from office because there was not that 2/3 majority threshold to remove them as a result of the Senate trial. The Senate also has the special power to confirm presidential appointees to the judicial branch as well as executive branch agencies, and also has the power to ratify treaties with foreign countries. And finally, the last set of differences between the House and Senate are under special procedures. The House is highly centralized, meaning its operations are tightly managed by the majority party leadership through structures such as the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee operates as a traffic cop, determining which bills will be considered on the floor of the chamber and under what terms of debate. It's a mechanism for the Speaker of the House to manage the House of Representatives in a way that suits the goals of the majority party. The Senate, on the other hand, is vastly different. It's much looser in its procedures and operations, much more decentralized, meaning power is spread much more broadly. So importantly, individual senators have the power of the filibuster, which is the power to block action on the floor of the Senate. So filibuster can only be overcome with a supermajority vote of 60 senators. In modern times, most uses of the filibuster is as a tool of the minority party, where minority party senators collectively work to sustain a filibuster as a way of blocking the majority party's agenda from being enacted into law. So it's very difficult to overcome a filibuster in the modern age. So why is the Speaker of the House such a powerful position? As mentioned earlier, because of the House's larger size, that chamber has given its leaders much greater authority to provide organization and structure to its proceedings. The Speaker is the presiding officer, meaning he or she has the power to recognize who can speak on the floor of the House, can rule on points of order, and decide which committee will receive a newly introduced bill. The Speaker also names conference committee members when the House and Senate need to meet to hash out differences between the 2 chambers' bills. The Speaker also controls the powerful Rules Committee by appointing that committee's majority party members. And the Speaker has strong influence over the committee assignments of rank-and-file members of the majority party. It's not uncommon for the Speaker to enforce party discipline by stripping wayward members of their preferred committee assignments. The minority leader in the House is an important but relatively weak position. Because the House operates so strongly under the control of the majority party leadership, the minority leader has little control over passing legislation. But the minority leader is a powerful spokesperson for the minority party and for making sure that the rights of minority party members are respected during the House's proceedings. Perhaps the highest priority for the minority leader is to strategize about ways to win the next election to regain the majority for his or her party. Leadership works a little differently in the Senate. Technically, the presiding officer of the Senate is the Vice President of the United States. However, the Vice President rarely shows up in the Senate, usually only taking part to cast a tie-breaking vote. The other Senate leadership position, mentioned in the Constitution, is the Senate President pro tem. This is mostly an honorific position, a title that doesn't carry a lot of real power. It is traditionally given to the majority party member with the longest tenure in the Senate. The real power of this position would only come into play in the case of a true catastrophe for the country, as the Senate President pro tem is third in line for succession to the presidency after the Vice President and the Speaker of the House. The most important position in the Senate is actually one that's not even listed in the Constitution, but instead has developed through tradition. That position is Majority Leader, the senator chosen by his or her peers in the majority party to lead operations in the chamber. Unlike in the House with the Speaker, the Senate Majority Leader's powers are much more limited because senators guard their individual prerogatives very closely. Former Majority Leader Tom Daschle once said that being Majority Leader is like trying to herd cats. That's a pretty good analogy, as senators have that cat-like independent spirit and are not inclined to follow commands. The Majority Leader does have the power to schedule business on the Senate floor. This is done with extensive consultation with the Senate Minority Leader, as both parties have to agree about how to proceed for much of anything to get done in the Senate. The Majority Leader faces a tough challenge. The leader is appointed to help advance the agenda of the majority party in the Senate, but in order to keep business flowing in the Senate, the Majority Leader has to gain the buy-in of the minority party as well. Not an easy job. The last leadership position to discuss is Minority Leader in the Senate. This position is actually quite powerful. Because the minority party has the power to threaten a filibuster to hold up most action in the Senate, the Majority Leader coordinates with the Minority Leader to come to agreement on scheduling business in the Senate. Just like with the Majority Leader, the Minority Leader faces the challenge of trying to advance the agenda of his or her party, while at the same time trying to keep business flowing in the chamber.